This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Nitsahone and it is Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. I've been doing MTG Top 10s for almost exactly 4 years, which is pretty crazy. The very first one came out on February 24th, 2016, and this one is coming out on February 28th, 2020. I've been doing them so long that some of the top 10s I've done in the past are desperately in need of updates, since things have obviously changed a lot in the last few years. From time to time, I like to revisit these lists. This is something I've done already with Planeswalkers and Horrors, and this time I'm updating Dragons. That video is a little over 3 years old. It came out on January 27th, 2017, and there have been some considerable changes to the list since then. Dragons are, of course, the iconic creature type for Red. In other words, they are the super powerful, well-known creature type that appears almost exclusively at higher rarities. However, unlike most other iconic creature types, Dragons also somewhat regularly are featured in other colors too, though red is certainly the most common color. It's also one of the most popular creature types in the game, so there have been a lot of them printed despite the iconic status. In all, there are 202 dragons. In this video, we're going to talk about the 10 of them that have made the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Additionally, there are 3 dragons that have dropped off the list from last time, and we'll look at each of them briefly. Before we do that though, here's a reminder on how I score cards in these videos. Pro Tour, Players Tour, Mythic Championship, as well as Legacy and Vintage Championship top 8s are worth 2 points, and a Grand Prix or Magic Fest top 8 is worth 1 point. Now, let's talk about the 3 dragons who made the list in 2017 but can no longer claim a spot on this list. First, let's talk about Rorik's Bladewing, who was number 10 on the list last time. Rorik's, like the other 2 dragons who fell off the list, hasn't gained any points since the last list, and that's not a good place to be since several good dragons have been printed since then. Back in his day, Rorik's was a big scary beater who could quickly win the game in the air with a highly efficient hasty body. Creature power creep is a real thing though, and these days paying 6 mana for something like this usually isn't worth it. And it definitely isn't worth it in the Eternal formats, which is the only place you can play Rorik's Bladewing. Next, there's Furnace Dragon, who was number 9 on the last list. Furnace Dragon's day in the sun was a long time ago at this point. It gained all of its points in 2004, and while that was enough to make the list last time around, it wasn't this time. The Dragon was a great card at hating on Affinity decks and block in Standard back in 2004, but it's a little too slow for any other formats. Tyga the Tidestar was number 8 last time and now isn't on the list. Tyga provides you with a reasonably costed 5/5 flyer with a pretty incredibly powerful death trigger. Stealing your opponent's creature means you're basically always guaranteed to get a 2-for-1 or better here, but outside of block and Standard, paying 6 mana for something like this isn't always a great deal, especially because some decks run very few creatures, making it nothing more than a decent-ish flyer. Alright, those are the 3 dragons who have fallen off the list since 2017. Now let's see what the top 10 dragons are in this updated list for 2020. At number 10, it's Gargan Hellkite, our first newcomer to the list. The Hellkite does a pretty good job of illustrating the power creep on a card like Rorik's Bladewing. It costs 1 less mana, and it might be smaller, but it gives you a choice between a 5 mana 5/5 flyer or a 5 mana 4/4 flyer with haste. Unless your opponent is almost dead, you usually choose the +1/+1 counter option, since it gives you access to a very powerful activated ability. Basically, unlike Rorik's, Gargan Hellkite can do multiple things, not just turn sideways and try to kill people. In Standard, Gargan Hellkite has been featured as the top curve for a bunch of aggro decks, with Gruul aggro being the most typical, but it also has points in Izzet and Temur decks too. The Hellkite is still in Standard right now, and it seems likely to gain at least a few more points before it rotates. At number 9, it's Yosei, the Morning Star, who was number 7 on the 2017 list. It's part of the same cycle as Tyga the Tidestar, a cycle which features a bunch of 6 mana 5/5 flying dragons that do something color appropriate when they die. In the case of Yosei, it both makes your opponent skip their untap step and taps down 5 of their permanents. That means your opponent is put in the horrible situation where they can either kill Yosei, or give up on developing the board at all for an entire turn, or even potentially opening themselves up to lethal damage if you tap down their creatures. That is a rough pick-your-poison scenario for your opponent. It was particularly nasty in Standard decks built around Glare of Subdual, as it could really lock down the board with Glare in play. Most of the dragons in that cycle saw considerable play in both block and Standard, but were never played in non-rotating formats. Of the cycle, Yosei found the most success being played in lots of white decks in both formats, and now Yosei is the only remaining dragon from that cycle that's still on this list. At number 8, it's Sillim Gar, the Drifting Death, which was number 5 on the 2017 list. It was part of the cycle of two-colored legendary dragons from Fate Reforged. Sillim Gar may not hit as hard as most dragons do, but he comes with a pretty nasty text box. Hexproof means that killing Sillim Gar is no easy task, and giving -1/-1 to everything when it attacks can often enable the rest of your board to attack too. Note also, by the way, you get -1/-1 for every attacking dragon. So if you get more dragons in play, you can really wreck your opponent. All of that made Sillim Gar a nice win condition for control decks in Standard, especially because there was a whole dragon sub-theme in that Standard format, which paid you off for having dragons. Obviously, Sillim Gar does that, but there were also spells like Sillim Gar's Scorn and Foul Tongue Invocation, which give you some nice bonuses for having a dragon in play or in your hand. Sillim Gar never found success outside of Standard, but it may have an outside shot in Pioneer going forward. At number 7, it's Thunderbreak Regent, which was number 6 on the 2017 list. This is another dragon from Khans of Tarkir block that has a dragon payoff ability. In the case of the Regent, you get a 4-mana 4/4 flyer, a nice rate, and he does 3 damage to your opponent anytime he or another dragon becomes targeted. This is nice because it means that you will always get some value out of the Regent. It might not quite be a 2-for-1, but if you're playing a super aggressive deck, your opponent's life is often low enough that having them take 3 from the Regent's trigger is bad news, even if it isn't quite as bad as letting a 4/4 flyer hit them a couple of times. A lot of the dragons on this list have found success in grindier controller mid-range decks, but Thunderbreak Regent was more well suited to aggro decks as a top curve threat that would make sure to take away some of their life no matter what. It was played in decks like Atarka Red and Red Deck Wins. It was also played in Gruul Dragon decks, which were more mid-rangey than the other Dragons decks in that Standard format. At number 6, it's Broodmate Dragon, which came in at number 4 on the 2017 list. Broodmate Dragon gives you 2 dragons for the price of 1. 6 mana for 8/8 worth of flying stats across 2 bodies is a great deal. The fact that you get 2 bodies means that spot removal isn't enough to deal with the problem. Your opponent would need a board sweeper, or otherwise 2-for-1 themselves to take down both dragons. Broodmate Dragon saw a lot of success in Standard, in particular in Jund decks, which were mid-range decks loaded up with 2-for-1 effects, so the dragon was perfect for the deck and functioned as a late-game win condition. At number 5, it is Niv Mizzet Perrin, another newcomer. This incarnation of Niv Mizzet, like all incarnations really, is a big flyer that's also a value engine. At worst, you get a 6-mana 5/5 flyer who pings something on every one of your draw steps, but it's usually going to do a whole lot more than that. That's because the decks that run Niv Mizzet tend to be able to draw cards in other ways, and also, Niv Mizzet can draw you cards on its own anytime someone plays an instant or sorcery. Because that includes your opponent, it means that Niv Mizzet will at least net you a card and 1 damage, even if he gets killed right away by an instant or sorcery. That's a pretty good fail case. If he's allowed to stay in play a couple of turns, he usually takes over the game. This makes him a great win condition for control decks. The fact he can't be countered and punishes your opponent for playing instants and sorceries also makes him a nice win condition against control decks. He has found mainboard success in standard decks like Izzet Drakes, Izzet Flash, and Izzet Phoenix, though he more frequently appears in the sideboards of those decks to bring in against more controlling opponents. He also shows up in the sideboard of most Temur Reclamation decks for the same reason. He's also played in Pioneer sideboards, in particular in Lotus Breach combo decks. Niv has already gained a ton of points for a card released in 2019, and it doesn't seem like he will be stopping anytime soon, so he may have a chance to continue to climb up this list. At number 4, I actually have 3 dragons, and that's because they're all part of the same cycle, and they are Sillim Gar, Ojutai, and Atarka from the Dragons of Tarkir Dragon Lord cycle. Funnily enough, these 3 cards would have been all in a row if I gave each their own slot. Sillim Gar would have been the real number 4, and Ojutai and Atarka would have been number 5 and number 6 respectively. All 3 of these dragons bring impressive stats and incredible abilities to the table. Sillim Gar lets you steal planeswalkers or creatures, Ojutai is hexproof as long as it's untapped and gives you powerful card advantage when the opponent takes damage from it, and Atarka has an enormous body and an enter the battlefield ability that usually lets you really mess up your opponent's board state. Ojutai and Sillim Gar were played in very similar decks, sometimes together, and these were dragon control decks, like those Sillim Gar Drifting Death was also played in. Atarka, meanwhile, saw most of its play in ramp decks, which could quickly power out Atarka a couple of turns early, something that is pretty hard to ever come back from. None of these dragons has seen play since they rotated out of Standard, but they did enough while they were there that their hold on this list is still pretty secure, and I wouldn't completely rule out Sillim Gar or Ojutai, or maybe even a Tarka, from getting points in Pioneer at some point in the future. At number 3, it's Thundermaw Hellkite, which came in at number 2 on the 2017 list. The Hellkite gives you an efficient, hasty body that also happens to get any flyers your opponent has around out of the way, and even kills the smaller ones. The Hellkite was extra good in the Standard of its time because one of the best and most played cards in the format was Lingering Souls, and the Hellkite was particularly good at dealing with those spirit tokens. Since rotating out of Standard, the Hellkite has seen play in Modern whenever the metagame is Lingering Souls heavy, and over the years it has killed some other key flyers in Modern too, like Vault Scourge. The Hellkite doesn't have any points since 2017, but we can never really count it out, since it will inevitably see more play if and when Lingering Souls becomes a bigger part of the metagame. At number 2, it's Stormbreath Dragon, which was dislodged from the number 1 spot on this list. Like a lot of red dragons that we've already seen, Stormbreath Dragon has haste and flying, which can allow you to put your opponent on a very quick clock. Protection from white is some nice additional value, and something that comes up pretty often. It can also go monstrous in the later part of the game, at which point it gets even bigger and damages the opponent. Stormbreath Dragon was great the entire time it was in Standard. It did well first in Devotion decks and later in Dragon Control decks. It also has a few odd points in other formats, but has never found consistent success outside of Standard. And at number 1, it's Glorybringer, a card that didn't even exist when I made the video in 2017, which really conveys just how much this card has been played over the last few years. It is almost double the points of the number 2 card, Stormbreath Dragon, so it isn't like it barely squeaked into the number 1 spot either. Glorybringer is yet another hasty flying red dragon, but it comes with a powerful exert effect, which allows it to do 4 damage to any non-dragon creature your opponent controls. The cost of that is that it doesn't untap for a turn, so it isn't something you always want to do, but the fact that Glorybringer has the exert ability and haste means it can often come down and immediately kill something, like a removal spell, and once it's done that, it's pretty hard for you not to come out ahead of your opponent. While it was in Standard, Glorybringer was pretty much a staple for red decks, and it was one of the most played cards in the entire format. It also has a couple of points in Modern, one coming in a Jund deck and the other in Temur aggro. Glorybringer may not be done yet either. While it doesn't have any points in Pioneer yet, it is being played in that format, and it seems likely to pick up points there in the future. Well, that does it for this MTG Top 10. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that other people can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to catch up on the other ones I've already done, you could even watch the old Dragon one from back in 2017. You should see the playlist on your screen now. Thanks for watching.